Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real parents having real conversations about what's going on in our Texas schools. Today, we're joined with Dr. Matt Ladner from the Heritage Foundation. Dr. Ladner is the foremost expert across the country on education savings accounts, and he's going to share with us a little bit about what's going on across the country and how Texas parents can have the same opportunities for their kids. A father of three and a policy expert, welcome, Dr. Ladner.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thanks for being here, Matt. So, we've been talking a lot about what we're seeing and almost this henny penny hair on fire conspiratorial nonsense that really the unions are pushing out. Mm-hmm. And I can remember back in the legislative session a year ago when so many leaders, including Governor Abbott, Chairman Buckley, and others were pushing for education savings accounts. And there was this one pager that was written by a gentleman named Josh Cowan, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of these, again, conspiracy theories of this destroys public education. In Arizona, the funding is all going to rich kids. I really want to talk about the myths, the fact versus fiction, if you will, in that. So specifically, that one pager addressed that Arizona kids are mostly rich that are using the Arizona program that's been around for about 2.5 years now. So can you talk to us about what's going on in Arizona, both who's using the program and the impact on the entire financial system?
Sure. Well, the reality is that we don't actually gather income information about, when people apply, it's a universal program, so they don't have to reveal their income. So let's just say that there are a lot of people guessing about what incomes may be. And I think the real way to measure this is to look at, the overall impact of the program, right? We have about 77,000 kids in the program. It is using like less than 1% of the total revenue of the state of Arizona and educating more than 3% of the kids, which is a good bargain for taxpayers. And when Stanford scholars, we've had like a lot of different forms of choice in Arizona for a long time now, starting all the way back in 1994. And a few years ago, there's a group of scholars from Stanford University headed by a sociologist. So sociologists from Stanford are not usually like in the tank for Arizona or anything,
sure.
Right? But these group of scholars at Stanford linked all testing data across the entire country in grades 3 through 8, okay? And they were able to measure academic growth for the students in these states, okay? This period that they measured, 2008 to 2018, so it was all before the pandemic.
Sure.
Arizona students learned more math and reading at a faster rate than kids in any other state. Okay, wow. That's both true for all students and for important subgroups of students, including low-income students. Okay, so the bottom line is public education hasn't been destroyed. If you go back and look at the data from since before we first started doing choice, so we say go back to 1993, there's 200 more district schools than there were back then. The spending has quadrupled on districts, and when you adjust for inflation, it's more than doubled. Mm-hmm. Okay. The kids are still playing football on Friday nights, right? There is no destruction. The schools are employing more people than they did back then. This entire story about the destroying public education is absolutely absurd. The funding for K-12 education is guaranteed in all state constitutions, and the public strongly supports that guarantee. Mm-hmm. Okay, no one even proposes doing away with that. And if they did, they'd get laughed out of the legislature. The same is true here in Austin or Phoenix. Mm-hmm. It's the same everywhere, right? It's as close to a permanent institution as we have in our society. But what we don't have to do is structure education in such a way that it results in catastrophically poor outcomes, right? And that's what we've done for the last century. And what we're up to basically is trying to modernize the public education system to make it more humane and to show more dignity to families so that they can choose the sort of school that best suits the needs and values of their families.
That's great. So just to confirm I heard you correctly, not only has public education funding increased in Arizona and across the country when we look at the studies, when you pass, when you empower parents with some form of school choice. But also the test scores tend to go up. And also, when we look at what's going on in Arizona, this narrative that it's just these rich kids, one, there's literally zero way to prove that because they don't collect income information.
Right.
But two, now what we're seeing after a couple of years is a lot of these kids that are participating, it's because their parents now know about it and they are moving over from the public school system because for one reason or another, their assigned public school is not working for them.
Right. So I can give you an example of a not rich kid from Arizona that your listeners will be familiar with.
Yeah.
That got the opportunity to go to a private school. His name is Bijan Robinson. Now, if you or your listeners are of the opinion that there are too many Bijan Robinsons in the world, that we have to be kept safe from people like Bijan Robinson, then by all means, you should oppose school choice, right?
Well, for those that don't know, who is Bijan Robinson?
Bijan Robinson is a great football player and even a more spectacular human being. And he was a running back from the University of Texas. He was so deeply loved by his teammates and coaches and admired. He's now a running back with the Atlanta Falcons after becoming a first-round pick. And Bijan, this is the sort of kid that growing up, it's not clear he would have had he went to a Catholic school in Tucson, Arizona, and he may not have had that opportunity if he had not been able to access the choice programs we have. So, the important thing is that it's not about systems, it's about kids, right? And being able to get the kind of school that matches your needs and values, right? And that allows you to flourish as a human being. The institutions survive just fine, right? Arizona could not lead the nation in academic growth if the district schools did not improve, which they did, right? Now, let me be a little bit nerdy about exactly what I mean by leading the nation in academic growth. That doesn't mean that Arizona has the highest test scores just on a raw form, right? Arizona has a majority-minority student population. We had a very large, obviously, we're a border state like Texas. We've had a very large increase in our Hispanic population. We have the nation's second largest Native American student population, right? So the achievement gaps are all pointed against us, right? And if you look at the testing data as far back as it goes in the nation's report card, back to the early 90s, before school choice, right? Arizona at that time looked a lot more demographically like Idaho or Wyoming or something, but our scores were low, okay? Fast forward, our scores are higher and our student population is much more diverse. And the way that happened is that all subgroups improved, right? And our 8th grade scores are better than our 4th grade scores, right? Because we're still grappling with those achievement gaps as 4th graders. But, a few years of faster than average academic growth and you start to catch up, right? This is very subtle stuff, but the bottom line is that the district system in Arizona is still there. It's better funded than it ever has been. It's actually at an all-time high of funding right now. You never know it by listening to our opponents, right? Because it's all about destruction and all this, that, and the other thing. They're better funded, they're better performing, and the kids have more opportunities to choose between different types of schools.
That's fantastic. So Arizona is one of those states that we are constantly looking at the success of just introducing choice. Because as you mentioned, for the children that need something other than their assigned district school, they have that opportunity, whether it's because of low performance in their school, the wrong environment, bullying, not getting their IEP.
Right.
Another state that I love to look at is Florida. Florida, you mentioned the NAEP scores or the nation's report card. That's what it's known within the education industry. And Florida passed private school choice back in 2002. And at that point, it was specifically for their low-income demographic. And when you talk about kind of the shifting demographics, the makeup of Florida, Texas, Arizona, there's a lot of similarities there, particularly with the minorities, the growth of minorities. And so Florida passed this for low-income kids. And at that point, on the nation's report card, the NAEP scores, their kids ranked number 33 in the nation. Within just 16 years of introducing choice, Florida went from number 33 all the way to number 1 where they still are today, beating out a lot of these more homogenous states, so these northeastern states that kind of hail themselves as the best public education. But the reality is, when we adjust for demographics, Florida's entire population ranks number one.
Yep.
Let's talk about the successes in Florida.
Yeah. If you look at, say, the nation's report card, fourth grade reading, which early literacy is crucial, because if you don't figure it out early, it becomes increasingly difficult later in life. Hispanic students in Florida score better on fourth grade reading in English than all students do here on average in Texas and in many other states.
Wow.
Yeah. Florida's African American students outscore a couple of statewide averages on fourth grade reading. Their high school graduation rate has improved. Their college going rate has improved. Their college graduation rate has improved. But beyond just test scores, right, there's something just really exciting going on in Florida right now. I have public school educators in my family. I bet you do too. Most people do.
Yes.
Right? And if you get together with them, say on a Thanksgiving, right, and they start talking amongst themselves, I'll put the over-under on them starting to complain about administration and bureaucracy at 5 minutes, right?
Yep.
It's going to happen within 5 minutes, okay? And eventually someone will make the note to say, if we ran the show, it would be so much different, okay? Well, in Florida, the state of Florida has basically told these teachers, hey, you know what? Show me, don't tell me. If you want the opportunity to go out and found your own school and to pursue your own vision of what a high quality education is, to be free of administrative bureaucracy, right? And to sink or swim based on whether or not you satisfy families.
Yep.
Do it. Like, we're going to make this possible. So you're literally seeing things where, like, teachers of the year who have just finally just had it.
Right.
Stories like a teacher of the year who got dinged in her evaluation because she, put too many posters on a wall or something, right? She's just like, this is it. I can't take this anymore, right?
Yep.
These people are literally going out, creating their own school, right? And it's just an amazing thing to see, because basically what they're doing is they're cutting out the middleman.
Yep.
Right? Sorry, bureaucrats, your services are no longer required, right? It is flourishing in Florida, and it's just so exciting. They're really kind of ahead of the curve, and they're worth keeping an eye on. I think you mentioned Josh Cowan earlier. Just today, there's a news article out where Josh Cowan, who's a union-funded academic, was complaining about micro schools, and he described them as the food trucks of education, right? and I was like, wow, Josh, I guess you didn't get the memo that Americans love food trucks, right?
We love them.
It's like, the ability to, be in charge of yourself, right? So, I think that this new world of especially education savings accounts, where families have the opportunity to avail themselves to just a whole wide range of education experiences, not just tuition at schools, but also, tuition, or we have ESA students that go to college, sometimes it's, like in ninth grade and things like that. Some kids are ready for that.
Sure.
There's always that kid that can pass the bar exam when he's 18 years old, right? I mean, that kid's out there, and it's really hard to design a system around that, him or her, right? But there's just this broader universe of educational experiences that are out there, people that are founding new schools, but also just new educational experiences. There's someone that lives here in Austin that I've read stories about, who literally travels the country, and he has a seminar he puts on, and what happens is that over the course of about 4 hours, as I understand it, he teaches you how to cast a bronze sword. Right.
Yes.
And he's wildly popular with kids. And, and this is something that, if he becomes an ESA vendor, or something that people can go and you learn a lot of different types of science and history.
I was going to say, that's a lot of chemistry.
Yeah,
that's a lot of science.
Like, boom, you knock this out this Saturday morning, right? So, It's something you can do that does not harm the all of the stuff. And in fact, the thing you hear the most about in this Destructo story, right, is rural schools.
Yes.
Right. This idea that, if you do this, right, there's two things that choice opponents claim about rural schools. The first thing they claim is that there are no private schools and therefore this will not serve rural students. And then out of the other side of their mouth, they say if you do this, it will completely destroy rural education. Right?
Yes.
These two things cannot both be true, but they can, and they actually are both false. Right? So my colleague Jason Bedrick and I wrote a study about this, specifically about rural Texas, and we did a compare and contrast between rural Texas education and rural Arizona, right? And our reasoning was, we have a lot of rural. I live in Phoenix, and we have a lot of rural schools in Arizona, right? And if you were going to find somewhere to find evidence that there was, that school choice is causing destruction of rural schools, it'd be Arizona, right? We've been at this since 1994. We passed charter school law and open enrollment in 1994. We passed tuition tax credits in 1997. We created the ESA program in 2011. I mean, we have the largest charter school sector in the country. It's 22% of our public school students are attending charter schools.
Wow, that's great.
If you were going to find somewhere to find like, oh my gosh, the school choice has just wiped out rural education, it'd be Arizona, okay? Well, when you go to the nation's report card, they'll let you slice and dice the data. And when you look at rural Arizona's academic results, they've improved. Okay. And not only that, every single school district that was educating kids back in 1993, before we started all this school choice stuff, is still educating kids now.
Right.
They're still playing football on Friday nights, right?
Right.
Everything is still there, right? They just perform a lot better than they used to, right? And rural kids are just like everyone else, right? Like rural kids can benefit from having some options too. And the big thing that is super helpful to rural communities is micro schools, right? The sort of the school choice 1.0 model of, hey, we're going to found a charter school and we're going to take out a $30 million loan and build a 600 kid. Like that doesn't really work in a lot of smaller communities, right? Micro schools are something that can provide a range of options within smaller communities and are not super disruptive, and which allows, and in fact, I would argue that often families, the parents, when the parents have kids and they live in rural communities, they feel a pressure to move out of the rural areas, right?
Right.
To find, good schools.
Yep.
Well, what if we let people start their own schools out in rural areas, right? They might actually stay, right? Which would be a benefit, right? So, in any case, there is zero evidence to support the idea that school choice has been destructive to rural schools in places like either Florida or Arizona, where we've been at this for a long time.
Right.
Education keeps going out there. Everything is still going fine, but families have more options, and that's key, right? So we can create more options without harming the district system. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that shows that it improves the district system.
Yeah, I think that's why here in Texas, the parent empowerment movement has grown so fast and so large, is because it's about really returning power back to the parents who know and love their children, more than any entity, more than any person, bureaucracy, even teacher. But when we talk about those micro schools that can pop up, one of the things that I remember studying in Florida was several special needs specializing teachers, those that were in special needs school, where they had been trying this kind of mainstreaming tactic of put every child into the classroom, whether it meets their needs and or whether your environment fosters a love of wonder and learning, as opposed to maybe being too much or too distracting or whatever it was. But that there were several teachers that went and said, I specialize in autism, or I specialize in dyslexia, or whatever, and I can go and plant my school right here in rural Florida. And these families who are not happy with the services that they're receiving at their district schools,
Right.
And they effectively create these micro schools that are really curated the environment for children who have specific needs. These teachers are so smart, and they do realize there's a problem within the current one-size-fits-all system.
Right.
which brings us to kind of why, if we have decade after decade of studies that show not just that test scores go up, but also that life outcomes go up. When you're introducing this, you've got less incarceration, less felony charges. You've got more kids that are graduating college or a trade school. You know, something here in Texas that we talk about is that 157 of our 254 counties are in population decline. Because parents in their child rearing and money making years, they are leaving to go seek out that education, to go seek out those choices, to go seek out the charter schools, to go seek out whatever it is that they need for their kids. I mean, that's our drive. I'm in those same years myself, and I can remember making the choice. We got into this incredible public charter school that is just booming, and I remember, screaming to my head, "We won the lottery!" and just being so excited. But then I didn't live close enough to be able to get from our home at that point, drop my kid off to school and get downtown for work. And so we were blessed that we could make the choice to be able to move. But really what we can do with incentivizing the entire system to give parents options, those that need it, want it, it not only incentivizes that public school system to get better, but it also provides an incentive in the rural communities. Same thing with workforce development, being able, kids, like you said, the ninth grader that could pass the bar exam or whatever, these kids that, whether they're just super intelligent and they can go and do that, or the kids that don't want to do the four-year college, that four-year college for all nonsense, which has quite frankly resulted in a huge workforce gap here in Texas and everywhere. I mean, we're going to be short. I think that the Workforce Commission projected 10,000 electricians in 5.5 years. So by 2030, Texas is going to be short 10,000 electricians, 6,000 plumbers, 45 HVAC workers, these really high-paying jobs. So that's one of the exciting things about education savings accounts, is that kids who say, I don't want to go to a four-year college. I really love to work with my hands and auto mechanics or oil and gas or whatever. They can go and get that opportunity, that training, when they're still under 18 in the school system.
Yeah. I mean, the way I like to talk about this, Mandy, is like, it's kind of a basic question. Like, who should be in charge of the K-12 system, right? And my contention is that we should think of the K-12 system like a potter at a potter's wheel, right? And there's two hands. And on the one hand, you have families, and on the other hand, you have teachers, okay? And together, they shape the clay of what the K-12 system is, right? So in Arizona, when parents demand more classical education, right, they get it, right? The Great Hearts charter school system, they took their curriculum from a Catholic school in South Bend, Indiana, and are wildly popular, right? So we have mechanisms for, like, somebody starts a school and, wow, we really like that, right? People really want this. Well, like, we can have another one and another, right? So this shapes the clay. Now, but there's other types of education that people also want, right? So we need a very pluralistic system where there is meaningful variation, right? And there's enough options that are proximate enough to families where they can credibly, get their kids to them and make it to work, as you said, right?
Well, we find carpool. I mean, that's the thing, is parents I constantly hear, like, oh, there's no transportation. I mean, look, I'm on social media messaging, and figuring out, okay, how do we piece this together? Who can do these mornings? And families can do that. We don't need the government to tell us how to get our kids to school.
And the more school options you have, the more proximity you have, right? The more kids that can walk and ride their bike to school, right? Instead of like trying to centralize everyone in these 3,000 kid giant high schools where, you're anonymous and you get lost in the woodwork and too many of the kids wind up dropping out of school, right? This allows you, this is a source of school improvement that cannot come from the top down. It can't, right?
Right.
This is families individually figuring out with their child what kind of schooling they want,
Yeah.
right? And what they're passionate about, right? So if your kid plays the trumpet like my oldest son did, you can go to a fine arts school. If your kid is interested in the classics and whatnot and wants that kind of education, you can get that. If you want vocational education, that's out there too, right? It's all out there, right? And you have a system of specialized schools, right, where people are choosing. And then the other thing is that what happens in the process, right, is that, like, so one of these examples from Arizona is our district, Scottsdale Unified, which is our, fancy 90210 type of, right? Okay. So Scottsdale Unified has 20,000 students, and 5,000 of them don't actually live within the boundaries of Scottsdale Unified. That's really strange, right? Fancy suburban school districts, and this is so normal, like it's like just the system where we all grew up in.
Yes.
And it just like seems like, but when you start thinking about it, right? Basically what we've created in this country is a shortage of high demand schools that you have to buy your way into with a big mortgage. Okay. So the average home price in Scottsdale Unified, last time I checked, was like $900,000. Okay. Yeah. But 5,000 of the kids, like a quarter of them, don't even live in the district. Right. Now, why do 5,000 kids get to go to Scottsdale Unified, right? So like I wrote a piece about this the other day, and it said, a real Fresh Prince could not go to Bel Air, but he could go to Scottsdale Unified. Okay. Like for real, right?
Yes.
Like the real Fresh Prince.
I've got the song going through my
Exactly, right? The real Fresh Prince does not get to go to Bel Air, right? That's not a thing, right? But he could go to Scottsdale.
Right.
Why? The reason 5,000 kids can go to Scottsdale Unified without living there is because there's 9,000 kids that live within the boundary of Scottsdale Unified that go to other schools. They go to other public schools through open enrollment. They go to charter schools. They use the private school choice programs, right? And so you hear a lot of people say, oh my gosh, like there might be wealthy kids using an ESA, quel horror, okay? Now, here's the thing. If those kids take an ESA, they're going to get about $7,500.
A fraction of what they get in the. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. If they go to Scottsdale Unified, they're going to get like $16,000, and I'm supposed to sweat like, oh my gosh, like we only gave them $7,500, but instead of $16,000, right? And when these kids leave to do something else, it creates an opportunity for kids that want to go to Scottsdale Unified, but otherwise would be excluded, right? So all of these types of choice programs actually work together.
Yes.
They live with each other out in the wild. And individual district schools, and by the way, open enrollment is the biggest kind of school choice in Arizona. There's almost twice as many open enrollment kids in the Phoenix area as there are charter school kids. We have the nation's largest charter school sector. Okay. Individual district schools, both, yes, they lose students to these choice options, but they also get students back. Right.
Do they charge for open enrollment in Arizona?
No, that was part of the law in 1994 that we passed, and it forbade them from charging tuition. They used to be able to do that, and no one did open enrollment.
Here in Texas, we've got this mentality that TBPF has fought against and advocated against because of these wealthy enclaves that say. They do the same thing that they're criticizing a lot of private schools for doing. You have to apply. Right. You have to interview. They can say no. And then there's down in Alamo Heights, I might mix these two up. So one of the ones, Alamo Heights, which is down in the San Antonio area, the really Bel Air area, and then Lovejoy ISD, one of them was charging right at $9,000 tuition. Right. To parents, and one of them was charging, I think, $14,500. I'm pretty sure that was Alamo Heights. Tuition. You have open seats, and anyways, it's just wild. Kind of how people have talked themselves into this mentality that
you hear people say things like, "Well, district schools take everyone, Mandy.
Nonsense.
They take everyone, right? As long as you can afford to be there." right?
Or the magnet schools. Yeah, I hear this all the time. You can go to a magnet school.
Right.
Well, I hate to break it to you, only 3% of Texas kids go to a magnet school.
The ones that can test in.
Well, yeah, but then 75% of the kids that apply to go in, they go through the testing process and then the interview process. And I always find it so interesting. One of our state reps here, Representative Gina Hinojosa, whose father's real big in the Democrat Party. I don't know exactly what he does, maybe the chair or something. But anyways, she used to tell a story about how trying to get her kids into a magnet school, her son into a magnet school, and they didn't get in. But then they found this great public school. She's in one of the wealthiest, areas of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, how do you not see? Like you had the ability, the connections.
So,
like it's just this like complete
there's
disconnect between reality.
There's so much hypocrisy.
Yes.
The Fordham Institute made a map of the entire state of Ohio. Okay, and every school district has been coded by whether or not the district participates in open enrollment or not, because it's optional, right? They can participate, they cannot participate.
Right.
Okay. Every single urban area of Ohio is surrounded by school districts who do not participate in open enrollment. Columbus, the capital of Ohio, looks like a donut.
Right.
It's literally surrounded by suburban districts that they don't have a single seat for open enrollment. How about that, right? So let's go back to our Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Fresh Prince doesn't get to go to suburban Ohio school districts, okay? The amount of economic and racial segregation that is baked into the district system because it is assigned by zip code.
Right.
Zip code assignment to school is an antiquated, horrific practice that there is absolutely no reason for us to be ruled by, right? We don't have to be just completely dominated by this idea that you either imagine if we ran our universities this way. It's like, oh, well, I, for instance, grew up between Beaumont and Port Arthur in Southeast Texas. Like, okay, Matt, well, great. You get to go to Lamar University and you can't go anywhere else.
Right.
No one would run any higher education system that way. It doesn't make any sense at all, right? But it's the way that we've traditionally done education, and it's what we're modernizing, right? This is not about destroying public education. It's simply about moving it into the 21st century and away from these sort of barbaric practices of the past.
I 100% agree, and I talk about it's the civil rights movement of our time. And in fact, one of the rural areas came out against Senator Ted Cruz, and I just felt the need to answer back and point out that when Brown v. Board of Education passed in 54, and it was literally the segregationists and the unions, it was Virginia teachers who were figuring out a way to keep their boundary lines, and they did not support school choice because it would have allowed it was quote a Negro engulfment. I mean, just an awful, abhorrent, just disgusting, you're going, how in the world can we continue to tell kids that because you live on this street, you must go to that school? It's just this complete disconnect. And when I think about it, just being the civil rights movement, the leader that we all equate to the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, talked about his dream, his vision, his belief that there are laws made by a higher being and there are laws made by man. And not until those laws made by man are reconciled and in alignment with those laws made by higher being. And I think about that all the time. That's when truly we are free. That's when truly kids have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And I really just think about that because right now we have laws, district lines, those are laws, right? Especially here in Texas where you don't have open enrollment. Those are laws, those district lines that are very antiquated, drawn by oftentimes not nice people for very not nice reasons. And until we acknowledge that and say, no, that dog's not going to hunt, right? So that's something that is just a passion that we have got to tell the truth. We have got to acknowledge what is happening.
There are literally people that have gone to jail because they have listed a grandparent's address as their own, trying to get a better education for their children. They have been investigated and imprisoned for seeking a better education for their children. This doesn't make any sense. It is purchased privilege, right? Yep. And it doesn't have to be this way. The public school system will improve when we modernize it. It will not wither up and die like a hothouse flower.
That's right. That's right. And it really is the reason why the parent empowerment movement has grown so big, is because every single parent, and we just had new polling that came out from Texas Southern and Rice University saying, yes, Democrats, Black Democrats, Hispanic Democrats, Democrats across the board, Republicans, Black, white, Hispanic, across the board, all overwhelmingly support empowering parents. Right. And the only ones that don't are those white liberals, right? Those with the elitist kind of complex of, I know better than you, mom and dad. And really, I think they're kind of trying to figure out, how in the world have we lost control of this narrative? And it's because the inherent love that every single parent has for their child, that, it transcends race, socioeconomics. We all felt that lightning strike of love, that desire to protect and provide for our kid and prepare them to launch. And so it's exciting to see what's going on with all the research that we have, because this is not new, right?
Right.
This is not a new concept. So let's talk about a little bit about those that are really afraid that this opens the door for government to regulate private schools or homeschoolers. As someone with a very healthy distrust of government myself, I absolutely do not, would never advocate or support anything that would open that door for government to come in and regulate. So again, we've seen this throughout the country, and those really strong, strict provisions that have been argued in front of the Supreme Court and protected states that have implemented school choice. But can you talk a little bit about that, about the protections and the legal autonomy that is in the legislation that Chairman Brad Buckley put forth in HB 1?
Yeah, this came up right from the beginning when we worked on the first ESA program in Arizona in 2011. And the Arizona Homeschool Association was very concerned.
Sure.
And we had extensive conversations with them. And fortunately, one of our members of our coalition who worked for the Institute for Justice was also a homeschool dad. And he worked with them and worked out very specific language that made it very clear that legally, well, first of all, we started with the standpoint that, yes, we need school choice, but it is absolutely vital that we not harm homeschooling, right? Like, we all respect and treasure homeschooling, right? And so the language that was worked out basically created a legal distinction between participating in an ESA program and homeschooling, right? You could do one, you can do the other, but you can't do both. Okay. So everyone in Arizona is still absolutely free to have absolutely nothing to do with the public school system, with the ESA program. It is still completely up to them at their option to do that, right? And that is very important. The danger of potential regulatory creep is real, and it must be vigilantly monitored and fought for, right? It is just like, Ronald Reagan said once that freedom is never one generation away from extinction. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's nothing to worry about, because it is something to worry about. And it has to be fought for. But what we've seen actually in multiple states at this point is the ESA parents will fight back, right? They'll fight against regulation, and they will fight to preserve their own prerogatives and freedoms and to keep intrusion out. So that's the sort of balance that is going to be reached. But anyone who wants to homeschool and have nothing to do with the government should always have the right to do that, and we need to make that clear. And, it's also the case that state governments could actually start homeschooling, regulating homeschoolers just on their own. So there's a potential of allies here that we can actually work together. And that's how we view the Homeschool Association Arizona as an ally.
That's right. Well, so part of the Parent Empowerment Coalition is the Texas Homeschool Association. And they're right there at the table making sure, of course, that homeschoolers are protected. Hence the reason why that this is the first point of accountability and protections is that the ESA in Texas is opt-in.
Right.
No one is saying that you have to do this. And we point to the UIL or the Tim Tebow bill, as everyone knows it, where kind of the same people that had the concerns, well, if you allow kids to play in the public school system, because those kids do have to take the STAR exam.
Yeah.
But even better, the ESAs don't require that. They require the norm reference testing that all the private schools already do. But it's just like, we are there in lockstep as we were. We were talking earlier about the learning pods and how micro schools and learning pods and homeschooling really took off. Pandemic pods took off. And I can remember when Austin, the only city in the country, because everybody was grappling with what are we, kids.
Yeah,
and I remember I was in that, I was like, oh God, what do we do with these kids? And learning pods really took off. And Austin, Texas, our comrade up there, he decided, and the city council was like, we need to regulate learning pods. And I can remember it was Chairman Dustin Burrows who was like, oh, the heck you are, and came out, and there was a lot of conversation about, do we take this on across the country as those that were working to empower parents. And he authored the legislation, the 1955 HB 1955, to be able to say learning pods cannot be regulated. They cannot. This does not open the door. And it was really, really instrumental here in Texas to be able to fight back against that. And there are learning pods. There's a school called the Blaze that's around Austin, and they're doing phenomenal work with kids. It's the micro school or learning pod, and even right to this day, they're having to deal with government that's trying to come in. And again, it's a coalition of people that are saying, no, parents get to make this choice.
So, Mandy, if regulation were the key to high quality education, American kids would be outscoring the Japanese and the kids in Singapore on the international exam. We'd be the envy of the education world because we've got so much regulation and such a catastrophically flawed system. This is simply not the way to go about it, right? The way to go about it is to have it come from the bottom up, to put teachers and families in charge of education, let them shape the system, and to let people like sort of develop the type of schools that where people want to teach. The unions are always talking about the teacher shortage, right? But they never pay attention to the fact that they've kind of ruined the teaching profession, right? I mean, about a few years ago, there was a 44-year veteran school teacher in Phoenix who called a talk radio program, and the host was so fascinated with him, he just kept him on for a whole hour, right? And what this person said was, I'll never forget this. It was amazing. He said, the problem with education is not money, because the money has always been tough. And it's true, like in Arizona, the spending per pupil is relatively modest because of a lot of different things, mostly age demography. But he said the problem with education is not the money, because the money's always been tough. The problem with education is that we've strangled the joy out of the profession, okay? And quite frankly, some of us, I'll include myself on this, we have to take some responsibility for this, right? The approach that we took in the 90s and the early 2000s was well-intended, right? But, it resulted in a lot of incentives for people to sort of teach to test and to like constantly be doing this, like practice testing and this, that, and the other thing. And it was well-intended, but it didn't work out the way we hoped, right? So, a more humane system where, teachers are passionate about what they do, where they get to be in charge, where the kids get to match their interests to the types of schools they go to. This is irreplaceable, and it is a system of education that works for teachers and for families.
That's right. And that's what this is all about, is the most important entities, the most important people in a child's success in their education, it's not their superintendent, it's not their principal, it's certainly not the government entities in Austin or whatever capital they're in, but it's the parent and the teacher. And that's why I think you see with the parent empowerment movement more and more teachers joining, more and more trustees. So just recently we had an incredible trustee come and talk about the great work that they were doing first talking about how parents locked together to run for school board positions, and then the great work that they were doing, and quite frankly, disclosed some of the really disgusting behavior that takes place at these associations and these unions where an entity was talking about, don't give your teachers pay raises. We need to leverage them in the elections and get them to vote a certain way. But I think that more and more I get emails from teachers a lot, and some of them will start out. I received one a few weeks ago, and a teacher started out by being more combative and it was the information she had been given by probably her superintendent and other entities. And once I pointed to the data, research you've done, there's 27 empirical studies that have been done showing this improves kids' lives and the entire system. And I love to engage with people because it's just about kind of shining a light and saying, okay, I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but I'm going to share with you this information that maybe you didn't have before. And by the end of it, we were it was multi-days. We were going back and forth, and it ended of her, acknowledging that, yes, and her then admitting, I left the public school because of exactly what you're saying. and me signing off and saying, I hope you have a really amazing school year. Because now she's at a public charter school. I looked it up. She told me what it was. It serves almost exclusively, it's 100% low income kids. And it warmed my heart because more and more teachers realize, look, we got this system that we've created, the overregulation, the trying to make teachers into mental health therapists, and all of these programs, whether it's DEI or SEL or any other acronym that they can come up with to kind of hide what's going on. They've had enough too. Yeah. And again, that's why they're turning in their superintendents, like Superintendent Benny Salow, who allegedly, I guess that's his point, who he was filmed on tape basically engaging in allegedly electioneering, but also kind of telling his teachers, yes, this is why you're not getting your $4,000 pay raises. So more and more people are waking up to that system that we can course correct.
Right.
By giving power back to parents, regardless of if you're a private school parent, homeschool parent, just the entire system knowing, hey, parents have choices. It really will change.
Right. Absolutely.
What we see.
I think what scares choice opponents more than anything is that the growing movement of teachers to start their own schools.
Right.
Right. Look, teachers are good people.
Yes.
They didn't go into education because they're going to get rich.
That's right.
Right? They went into education for the right reasons. They joined this system and they find themselves stymied. Yep. Right? They don't get to pursue their own vision of education. They are just, they know, they know.
They know.
They put their kids in private schools at higher rates
they do.
than the average.
That's a great point. Yes,
know.
Teachers put their kids, they know.
Right. They know. They went into education for the right reasons.
Yes.
They know the system's messed up, and when you start giving them opportunities to run their own schools, they start doing it, and that is when the opponents really get frightened.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because a growing number of teachers are coming over to our side of this argument.
That's
where
right.
they can be free, right? Where they can be free from bureaucrats and administrators and whatnot. And that is the most exciting thing for me and the most terrifying thing for our opponents.
I agree. And that's why I say whenever a teacher reaches out, I'm like, oh, I want to talk to you. Like, let's talk about this.
And isn't it amazing that this has happened despite the fact that the unions bomb them with propaganda from day and night for years and years on end? But, just like, some sort of Soviet system or something, they figure out what's real, what's not
Once
real.
you start talking about it and showing them, they're going, oh, wow.
Right.
Oh, superintendent, you didn't take a pay cut on your $300,000 salary, but you kept $4,000 from my family.
Right. So think about it this way.
Their eyes are open too.
Let's assume that you're talking about a fifth grade classroom here in Texas, the average spending per pupil, say, let's just make up a number, $10,000 per pupil.
It's $16,792 per student.
Okay,
we're almost, just so everybody's clear, we do have a lot of people that don't realize this. We spent $92.4 billion
Right.
last year,
Right.
which comes out to $16,792 per
Okay,
student.
so
So we are not. I want you people
Let's just take 16,000.
Yes.
Okay. A classroom with 20 kids, if my Texas public school math is serving me correctly, that's $320,000 in revenue generated. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's assume that we're total compensation for the teacher might be 80,000. Okay, where did the other $240,000 go? Right? Where did it go?
Right. Well, we're
Right?
asking when we talk about it, so we can see if we look at the numbers from the Texas Education Agency on how we're spending, and they put this out.
Right.
So we can see it. Somewhere, depending on the district, you're looking at about 35 to 40 cents on the dollar goes into the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Right.
35 to 40 cents on the dollar goes into the classroom.
Right.
20%, another 20% goes to massive administration. I mean, the administrative bloat that we see is disgusting here in Texas. And it's part of the reason why the unions and the taxpayer-funded lobbyists don't want to have, they don't want their schools to participate in their districts participate in incentive pay. They want to keep their teachers this pay schedule at a certain amount, no matter how well you're doing, because then they force you to go into administration. So about 20% is teacher retirement, but then it's mostly those administrative costs that have just exploded. They're disgusting. I mean, hundreds of you've got superintendents in Texas that are making 2 times as much, maybe 3 times as much as the governor of Texas. 3 times as much as the head of TEA. And they're like, well, they're over this. I'm like, the man that has created the Texas Miracle gets paid a fraction of what you do. Please stop telling me you should have a $500,000 paycheck and 50% of your kids can't read. But then that remaining 40%, profiteers, lobbyists, consultants, Texas, people don't realize this, Texas is #1 in the country for capital outlay.
Yeah.
Capital outlay. So for building things, look, we have got, again, these profiteers, these architecture firms, these builders, these construction company. I mean, it just goes on and on. 40 cents on the dollar goes to those that are building. I mean, that's why we have schools that looks like the Taj Mahal, to be perfectly honest.
Right. So you can see this in the national statistics. Like you go take them back as far back as they'll go. It used to be 2 teachers for every non-teacher in the American public school system. Today, non-teachers are a majority of school district employees. A majority, right?
Non-teachers, again.
Non-teachers make up a majority of school district employees in the United States of America.
Yes.
Okay. And this makes no sense at all. There's one thing you absolutely have to have to run an education system is teachers.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying you can have no non-teachers. You have to have some non-teachers too, but do they need to outnumber the number? And what this has done is actually to place a low ceiling on how much you can compensate teachers.
That's right.
And it goes back to the example we gave earlier. 20 kids, 1 teacher, $320,000. Where'd the rest of the money go?
Right.
Most of it went to non-teachers, right? And so, this is why people are able to walk out the door of school districts in Florida, start their own school with 20 kids, and do just fine.
That's right.
Right? This is like the Silicon Valley people have a fancy term for this. It's called disintermediation. But let's just call it cutting out the middleman, right? Like, it's just, and that's what this is. This is actually, there's a lot of people that are very concerned about their job security in this system that unfortunately does not work for a lot of kids. Right. The system can work for a lot more kids, right? It can work for more teachers, right? But it can't do it the way that we've been trying to do it. Now, the late 20th century attempt at public education is just not getting the job done.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's just, and it's not in Texas. 50% of our kids can't read, 60% can't do math. And that's just on the Texas scores. We're not even jumping into the NAEP scores, which are even worse.
Right.
So this has been amazing. Thank you for shedding light on some of the fact versus fiction, how empowering parents with education savings accounts is truly the rising tide that will lift all boats.
Yeah.
You're a Texan.
Yep.
went to school in Texas, grew up in Texas, went to college in Texas. There you go. And what do you want to tell the parents of Texas? You are considered the nation's foremost expert and have been a part of advocating for, but also implementing programs throughout the country where this is wildly successful. What do you want to tell Texas parents, all Texas patriots that are learning and trying to understand the parent empowerment movement and why education freedom through education savings accounts is crucial to course correcting our system and putting Texas on the path to being the very best educated kids in the country?
Yeah, I would say you need to have confidence in yourself and in your teachers, especially in your teachers. You need to empower your teachers to let them go out and create their own schools, and to have enough confidence in yourself to select between the ones that are going to work for your kids and the ones that aren't. Once you do both of those things, the entire system begins to change. But it only gets better. It doesn't get worse.
That's wonderful. Well, Dr. Ladner, thank you so much for being here to share your knowledge and wisdom with everyone and your experience, both as an expert, but also as a father yourself. Thank you for joining us on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.